the Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, give a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Check out all our past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
You know our next guest as a member of the band Saigon Kick and their power ballad, Love Is On The Way. The song sold a zillion copies, and the reason you hear this man on Celebrity Jobber. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest is Jason Bieler. You know, I think we met back in 1998 or 1999. I was working at a station in Fort Myers, and you were writing a song or an album for the movie, what the hell was the movie? American Pie.
American Pie, right, yeah.
By the way, that song that you had, the song was Super Down from the band Super Transatlantic. That became a big hit, was in the American Pie soundtrack, was all over the movie.
Yeah, I mean, we wrote the back of Blink-182, but I prefer the way you tell it.
I mean, it was all over the movie. You know, I thought, and that was, okay, the beginning of our relationship, and that was like maybe a resurgence for you in music at that time?
Okay, I'll accept that. I mean, I don't know if a resurgence, depending on what your term, how you look at the word surge, I think is really the important part of that word.
Right.
It's more of a minor raising of the water issue, but nothing that a mop couldn't take care of.
Well, I mean, look, you had a lot of success in the early 90s with Saigon Kick, and, that was a huge hit. And, and then, Saigon Kick went through some personnel changes, and through the 90s, that happened in the latter part of the 90s. So, that's where I come up with the term resurgence. And I just think it makes me sound smart. It makes me sound smart saying that word.
That makes me feel good, actually. I surged again. I had many surges.
All right, let's go back. Let's go back in time. I want to know more about where you're from. Now, I know you grew up in Miami or in South Florida, but where are you from originally?
I was born in Long Island, New York.
Wow, and you lived there for how long?
About 9 years.
Okay. So
in Smithtown, Long Island. So
what happened? Mom and Dad got a new job in South Florida and moved you guys down?
Yeah, we packed up everything we had and in the family Pacer.
Right.
It was the Wayne's World Pacer.
Oh, man.
And we drove from New York to Florida, the children being burned to a crisp because that vehicle was nothing but windows.
Yeah.
With a white interior.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, I think we lost a couple siblings on the way down. It was much like the old wagon trail days. And then we moved to Florida in probably, I guess it would have been 1979, 78, something like that.
And what kind of work was your dad into?
I don't really know. He was a man my grandfather was actually like a steel tycoon.
Okay.
Back in the day, and had like the largest steel plant on Long Island. So I think my father was always kind of like living in the shadows of his unbelievably successful, father.
Okay.
And then my grandfather is like that story of came over on a boat by himself from Russia when he was like 12. So like they kind of So my grandfather started it, and my great-grandfather started the company. My grandfather ran it for a while and then sold it. And then I think my dad was off trying to find his own way. So he did a little bit of everything.
Okay.
And, his insurance salesman, bought like 8,000 boxes of ties that he was going to sell at the flea market to make his mark.
Right.
But they were the wide ties when the skinny tie became in fashion. So I don't know that we ever got rid of those. I just remember like not being able to get my bike in the garage.
Those are coming back in style.
They were just a slight, such a fine line between entrepreneur and a stuffed garage.
So when did music come into your life? You come down to Florida, you were, 9 or 10 years old, and when did you fall in love with the guitar and start playing music?
I mean, my earliest memories are musical. I mean, just being in the back of the car, hearing the AM Gold stuff, and I think my parents had a couple of 8-tracks, so it was like Meet the Beatles. I remember having that on 8-track,
right?
And like the Fifth Dimension, like Up and Away, and this is, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, just always hearing that kind of stuff. I mean, it just right away felt like something I kind of had a feeling for and understood, and more important, it was my private little friend.
Right. You needed one. You were lonely.
I needed a friend. Yes, I was a strange child.
You started playing guitar at what age?
Probably around 9 or 10.
Okay. Wow. And then, so what about your first band? When did that happen?
I mean, I don't even know that I got in a band ever, really. I mean, it was more like, a couple of kids in the neighborhood were playing, and then, so I was playing, we were listening to records or whatever, and then trying to emulate whatever it was I was hearing. And then as time went on, everybody in your neighborhood, like there's one guy that's the great quarterback, and one guy can run faster than anybody else, and one guy, was good with getting girls. Yeah, sadly, guitar was the thing I was really good at the time. I would have traded that 10 times over back in the day.
Right.
But that was the one thing that I could pick up, riffs and hear stuff and kind of translate that stuff much quicker than anybody else. And the more you get attention for being a little bit better than anybody else at something, the more you tend to fall in love with it. And it just became a vicious cycle to the point where I was not torturously. I mean, I would just play guitar 10, 12 hours a day. Not even so much, in a practice thing, just playing. I mean, I just loved playing.
When did Saigon Kick form? How old were you then?
18 or 19, maybe.
Okay, wow. Okay. Still,
and that probably would have been, it was simultaneous as that band was developing. I had played on a friend's demo that he had sent, because Jeff Scott Soto had just left Yngwie's band and was trying to put a band together that I had no idea about, and this guy knew about it, so he sent his bass playing that I had played guitar on to Jeff, and Jeff was like, not really interested in you, but who's the guitar player? So I got a call from Jeff asking me to come out to LA when I was about 18. At that time, kind of as Saigon Kick was developing too. So those two things happened simultaneously, and then a couple months after meeting Jeff, he asked me if I wanted to go to Sweden and play with all the Rising Force, Marcel Jacob and those guys from that band. So I wound up touring over there on and off for about, probably almost a year total, working with those guys as Saigon Kick was starting to kind of develop its thing. So whenever I was back from touring with them, we would just start doing more and more Saigon Kick stuff.
So do you ever think about like a particular moment that you feel like was your big break, other than speaking to me right now on this podcast?
Right now. Well, I'm looking forward to that feeling happening. I think I'm only a few months away. I feel like I'm on the cusp of I don't know. I never really. I mean, it sounds dumb, but I never couldn't really give a crap less about being a rock star. I mean, it was always cool to have that moment in the sense where you got maybe a better table at a restaurant, or like they would upgrade you at the airline or something like that for those. But that was never really. I just really always dug making music. So, and I've been doing it long enough and you've been around long enough to do it. You're going to have up years, down years. So you better really love making music, because if you just love the moment of having that successful wave, it can be a brutal business. And, we have tons of friends that, have been brutalized by the fact that they're no longer it.
Right.
And to me, not that I don't care. It's always nicer to be loved, given the two choices. But it's just, to me, like a bonus. It's not something it didn't matter to me. So,
but I mean,
I don't really remember having a hit, like being like, oh, now we're big, or now we're successful. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, I was always looking forward, so I never really felt like we got anywhere.
So you never look back on the moment of like, look, The Lizard was an album in, 1992-ish that before I even knew you, that was a big album in my collection, and I, loved it. And I remember when I started listening to it, and then Love Is on the Way became a big hit on MTV. I think things changed for you. It seemed like things changed for you pretty much overnight. Maybe getting the good table at the restaurant, maybe just becoming a little bit more familiar with other people that have now seeing you on TV. You don't have to be in South Florida to be recognized. You could be in Wisconsin and somebody knows who you are. Did that happen when Love Is on the Way became a big hit?
I don't know. I don't think we were. I mean, we were in this weird area of big, but not that big. So like it wasn't. I never had I didn't have any issues with fame, like the cast of Different Strokes or something. But I mean, I don't mean to say that it wasn't a cool moment, but I think I was so focused and driven at the time that I can look back now and go, oh, that was really cool. I mean, the big ones for me probably was when we got to open for Ozzy at the Budokan.
Yeah.
Because Ozzy was the first concert I ever saw. So, like, seeing him back in the day on I think it was the Blizzard of Oz tour with, Randy Rhoads and Rudy Zarzo and Tommy Aldridge, and then opening up for him in Japan and becoming friends with Zach. And I remember Zach had me standing, like, behind his amps and just, like, really having that Lion King moment of, like, looking out at the crowd and seeing roughly where I would have been sitting, as a kid, and realizing now, like, the guitar player is my buddy, and like we're playing without. It was just that was a kind of really cool, maybe, like a Lion King moment of like, come full circle.
I got goosebumps right now from you telling that story because I could only imagine, and look, it happens to anybody. I know you're a pretty humble guy. I mean, you don't want to talk about being a big star and all this, but this is called celebrity jobber. You got to at least pretend there's some form of celebrity here. I mean, but playing.
I'm ruining the whole. I'm going to take your podcast. This is what you get for not having me on first.
But seriously, that is a moment that do you reflect ever? Do you go back to that moment and just like remember it and just kind of take a jog down memory lane when you're just sitting around, maybe playing a crossword puzzle, have some alone time, and you remember that particular moment? And
now you're pressuring me into saying stuff just to make your podcast good. I mean, it's a nice memory. When you force me to think back, I was like, oh, that was a cool thing. I mean, there's a lot of little touchstones like that, we played with Faith No More early on. We played with Soundgarden early on. We toured with the Ramones, which was amazing.
Yeah.
We toured with Cheap Trick, who were heroes of mine as well. I mean, so little things like that were really, pretty massive. But generally speaking, I was such a driven, maniacal prick that I was just worried about next and not really probably spending as much time enjoying the moment as I should have.
Right. What about before Saigon Kick? What about before music? Like, okay, so your family was in the steel business and had their own, had a big company. And what was your first job?
The first job I ever had that I can remember was I worked, I faked, my family helped me fake my birth certificate.
Well, that's good.
And I got a job at like 14 or 15 at a company. I don't know if you remember these guys. They're called Richway.
Yeah, wasn't it a supermarket?
It was like a Target, like an early kind of Target.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So I remember working there, and I remember really being fantastic at sleight of hand. So when my friends would come to my checkout counter, I was able to look like I was scanning items and just kind of skip the scanner. And then my family caught wind of that, and then they became my best customers. So, like, they would have like 9 carts full of items, and it would be like a $13 bill. And
oh, man.
So I quit just before I figured I'd be sentenced to hard time.
Okay, so that didn't last very long. Was that one of your only jobs or your only paying jobs outside of music?
That was really, that was a little bit of a job. I remember another friend of mine convinced me that I should go to another retail establishment, and he got the job of buffing floors.
Oh, wow.
And this was but the great thing about it was you'd go out and practice all night and do whatever, and then you'd go there at like 3 a.m, and you'd work for a couple of hours, and then you'd be done at like 5 or 6, and you're done for the day. I found out that they had a record collection in there and started wearing extremely baggy pants. I was like the poor man's Al Capone. I never got into high level crime, but I did pilfer a few CDs, and then when I figured out this was I was going to be eventually taken down by a SWAT team.
Yeah.
I left that job after, and I was only there for a couple of weeks. And the only other things I remember is I worked. Phil, the drummer, got me a job on a lawn service, which I despised, and I worked like 15 minutes in the Florida heat, and I was like faking injuries, and I would literally like whip myself in the eye with a branch and to go, like, I got to go home. I got to get this looked at. So I lasted about a week total.
Wow.
For doing that. So yeah, I've never really had a real job other than music, which is pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing. Well, you did have a real job that you owned your own business, and I actually worked for you for a few years, and that was a record label, and that was
the record label. I thought that was a strip club by the airport.
It was a lot of fun. I mean, we had a lot of fun, and even though you were in South Florida and I was in Southwest Florida, we were a little bit away, but we got some things accomplished. When did you figure out that like a record label? Because maybe when you're in a band, you kind of get to see how the record label is, I don't want to say screwing you, but it seems like there's a lot of money that comes their way, and it doesn't always flow its way down to the creators of the actual music. Was there something with you that, when you were in bands and Saigon Kick, and you were like, man, these guys are driving nice cars. They're really, they're making good money at this record label. They didn't write one note of this song. How do I get into that line of work? Was that pretty much what made you want to try to, own a record label?
I mean, again, my thought process was that, the band stuff had kind of run its course. I started producing a bunch of records and finding a bunch of records, and, developed a relationship, with a friend of yours and mine, Hans Zito. He was working at MCA at the time. And I had discovered early on some bands like Non-Point, and they were kind of blowing up. And that led to a kind of a hybrid situation where, MCA was like, hey, would you want to, start your own imprint? And I'm just one of those people that opportunity knocks, whether you're prepared for it or not.
Right.
So if someone says, hey, would you like to fly the plane? My answer is always going to be sure. And then I'll start Googling and try to hopefully figure out how not to kill everybody.
Right.
So as the opportunity was presented to me, I was like, of course I would love to I'd love nothing more than to, run a label and figure that out. So I started, building that whole part of the career. It just was, I love music. I love being around music. I love being around creative people. That 10-year period was amazing, and I'm super proud of the bands we worked with, like Skin Dread and Carnival and Non-Point, and there's so many others you can keep bringing up. But I did realize at the end of that I pretty much hate labels. I hate managers. I hate bands. I hate radio. I hate everybody involved in the whole business equally. So my thought was, as an artist, I'm going to go into I'm going to correct the record business. And then in the record business, I'm like, my God, artists are idiots. Like, the whole thing is just an insane ecosystem of insanity. But, the record company side of it, they spend a lot of money taking chances to build bands. When the band doesn't have a hit, it's all the record company's fault.
Right.
It's all the manager's fault.
Right.
And when they do have a hit, it's not because of anybody helping them. It's because they're singular geniuses.
Right. Right.
So it's two sides feeding into the insanity of it all.
I find the world as a whole kind of works in that same manner. So, I'm starting to see a lot of similarities between the record business and, any types of business. It seems like that's generally the way it goes these days.
You very rarely see a band say, okay, Warner Brothers gave us $1 million across 2 records and we flopped. I'm really going to spend some time now and pay them back.
Right.
It's always like, we sold $10 million and they only paid me $3 million.
What do you think?
Well,
what do you think you're most proud of? Is there a single moment from the record label that you can remember that you were just like really, really proud of? I know there was I could tell you 2 or 3 different occasions from the time that we worked together on the record label that I was really proud and excited. But what about you? Were there a few different instances that you were really pumped up about?
I mean, I'm super proud of the success and the careers of the bands that we worked with that have gone on and are still going on and doing great things. I mean, I'm super proud of the Non-Point guys. And I think it's pretty miraculous that for the most part, we're all still friends.
Yeah.
I mean, I talk to Benji and the guys in Skindred all the time. And, I think we did some amazing things together and fought some amazing battles together. And I think those bands are still out there, and I like to think that in some small part, the work that you did and I did and my brother did and, kind of played a part in those guys having some really cool career stuff going on. So, I mean, that's always a satisfying thing.
There was Non-Point and Skindred, and they were, favorites of mine, but I can remember a couple instances with one band called Another Black Day that was really, I was really proud of what we did with those guys, and another band that people probably don't know, but you'll definitely know one of the guys in the band, and that band was called Fiction Plane, and then the lead singer was Joe Sumner, who by chance happens to be the son of Sting from The Police. I can tell you that was another great moment in Bieler Brothers records for sure.
Yeah, man. Getting to work with those guys and I think they made, like I said, I think a lot of those bands, Carnival included, and you just go down the whole, we've had a bunch of bands on Ozfest and we got to do a bunch of really cool stuff. So, Warped Tour and all those kinds of things. I think for a bunch of knuckleheads in Florida, we pulled off, at the time, I think we were one of the larger indie rock labels in the country. And that's something to be proud of. Absolutely.
So the label, you decide to call it a day, and then you want to get back into music. What the hell are you thinking? What made you say, okay, let me grab the guitar, let me start, not only touring because you started doing some stuff with Saigon Kick, and then you started going out on your own and doing your own stuff. What led to going back out on the road at your age? God damn it.
Hey, easy now. Well, one, we didn't really go on the road. Saigon did like 5 or 10 different shows, on that reunion that ill-fated. It was very much like the 3-hour tour of Gilligan's Island. It was an ill-fated, crashed upon the shores kind of thing. So we did a bunch of shows and that ran its course. I always loved making music. So really what I started doing was I just said, I still had my studio and all the stuff, from that. So I was like, I'm just going to finally sit with no commercial aspirations and no, let's have a hit kind of thought process. And I'm going to start writing. And I set some limitations. I was like, I'm going to write, record, and release these songs onto this format called Bandcamp, just for my own writing exercise, just keep getting better as a writer. So I wound up over the course of a year or two writing probably 100, 140 songs that wound up going on this Bandcamp site. And it started to really develop its own, cult following. It started getting, more and more people were into it, and it developed its own little world. And at that point I was like, maybe I should, mess with trying to do a record. And I figured what would be really cool is to call up a bunch of people that I love and respect. And so everybody from Todd LaTorre, our good friend from Queensryche, and Bumblefoot, and Clay Cook from the Zac Brown Band, and Devin Townsend, and Bumblefoot, and Clint Lowry from Sevendust, and David Ellison from Megadeth, and all these guys. Benji from Skindred actually was on a track. And I made that first record, solo record, Songs for the Apocalypse. And miraculously, with no real thought process, it got really kind of a lot of support from the prog world, which is something I had no idea would ever happen. So a whole brand new base of people kind of discovered that part of it, and the record did really well. And so it's just one thing led to another naturally. And just when I thought I was out, to quote the great Al Pacino,
they pulled me back
in. but I'm having a blast now. And I think my mentality is a lot more, I just really do whatever I want. I'm fortunate enough in my life that I've been successful enough not to have to panic and not to have to be like trying to compete with, Harry Styles. And I just do whatever I want. And the funny thing is, I've learned that the less I really worry about that stuff, the more somehow or another really good things happen.
Is it pretty satisfying for you to just because I would think there's no machine behind you. You're writing music, you're putting it out there, and you've got this incredible response, and now you're touring behind it. You're doing your own thing. It's all you. I mean, there's no machine. I mean, is that pretty satisfying to know that you can do this professionally on your own with pretty much no help from anybody?
Yeah, I think it works for me because I'm insane. So, as much as I love to be this team-oriented guy, I'm a spoiled baby, and I like to do what I want to do when and how I want to do it, for better or for worse. And this has enabled me not to have to constantly be justifying or getting on the phone with 9 marketing idiots at a major label going, but I want to do this ridiculous picture. Well, we've done some research, and that doesn't really think that, right now the thing that's happening is if you do a TikTok dance, you'll blow. It's like whether they're right or wrong is irrelevant. Like, I just don't care.
Right.
So that part of it's been just really fulfilling. And the thing is not that, again, it's not about being a mega star. It's just the more I stay true to whatever I think is the right thing to do for me, it just seems to be taking on a life of its own and working out for me. And the second I start to go like, what if I got a team? And if I did this, and let me just talk to all my friends, because I'm still friends with everybody at the labels. I'm not one of those guys who hates everybody and doesn't, or blames people or has that kind of bitterness at all. I love those guys. But I just don't necessarily want to deal with anybody because I'm a maniac.
So do you think, look, man, music has been everything in your whole life. But do you ever think about, and I've seen a lot of your solo shows. And when I say a lot, I mean, at least a half a dozen. I consider that a lot. And do you ever think about if it wasn't for music, where you might be, what you might be doing? I mean, I think you're a pretty funny guy. Honestly, we have a lot of laughs together. And when I see some of your solo shows, they're a lot different than seeing any other kind of musicians. You're doing you're having fun. You're telling jokes. You're telling stories. You ever think about maybe, doing a comedy act?
Well, I mean, the whole goal of the stuff, especially the stuff I do with Jeff, is just to be a cabaret vaudeville act. I mean, if I can get to the point where I don't have to bring a guitar, I will have succeeded. So it's always great to fall back on the fact that when you're trying to be funny and it doesn't work, you can go, and now here's Love Is on the Way. And it kind of bails you out of, as opposed to standing up there as a comedian proper. But yeah, I mean, it's been that whole side of it's been another whole amazing thing because literally we've gotten together and decided to do these shows, which are, pretty much unscripted chaos. And, none of it really makes sense in the sense that, we're doing Lizzo covers, Barry Manilow covers, Metallica. It doesn't matter what there's really, it literally is chaos. And then that has grown to take on a life of its own. And we're selling out all these really cool venues all around the country. And, and it really feels like I'm like, hey, Jeff, where do you want to go get hammered? And what hotel do you like? And is there a good restaurant? Well, why don't we do a show there? And, numerous times in the middle of the set, I look up and realize, oh, my God, there's people watching this.
Wow.
It's great.
Some people plan weekends to go somewhere and play golf. And I think this is your golfing weekend. This is what you do.
No, I'm like Burns Steakhouse. Let's go to Tampa.
Yeah, we'll do it. Man, I tell you what do you think? What do you think if it wasn't for music you'd be doing? Do you ever think about that? Like, what happens if you had carpal tunnel syndrome, you couldn't shred anymore, and this was never a part of your life? What do you think you'd be doing?
Yeah, I don't want to say I would be Jeffrey Dahmer, because I wouldn't. But I think some of those, I mean, the music has been such a wonderfully therapeutic way of saying horrible things and writing these really strange things and getting that stuff out that if that was pent up inside me, I'd be a very dangerous individual on the streets.
Well, you're a large man, so there's danger there.
I'll come off the top rope with the atomic elbow and really do some damage.
Yeah, wrestling, there's that. Tampa, you could always move back to Florida, and there's wrestling schools here. You could probably get into something like that.
Maybe some kind of circus act. I mean, I would definitely, I love show business, anything in general. So I would hope to be involved in something like that. But yeah, I can't even imagine the horrible things that I would have done with my life had I not been distracted by music.
Well, we're glad that music, was and is a part of your life. And I appreciate you talking to me, and we got a lot accomplished, I think, here. I mean, we found out your story. We found out that you might be somewhat of a kleptomaniac. Hopefully you have... Yes. Maybe you have grown up over the years and rehabilitated yourself.
You don't realize every little office supply last time I was at the station is missing. That was me.
Yeah, I noticed some T-shirts. I definitely noticed the prize closet was bare.
I went through and pilfered everything.
But
a kleptomaniac, I like to think of myself as a more I was a Robin Hood.
Right.
I was stealing from the man and giving it to the people.
Okay. Well, that's good, as long as it wasn't. I guess it was used for good.
I do have to admit that I did keep the Shout at the Devil record, the live Double Ozzy record that I stole, but that was just research for my music career.
What's next? What do you got? You got a new record that you're going to put out pretty soon?
Yeah, it's coming out April 14th. It's called Postcards from the Asylum, which makes sense after having this conversation.
Yes, it does.
And I'm real pumped about that. We got a bunch of friends on it, like from Todd Kearns from Slash's band is on it. Ryo Akamoto, who's from this band Spock's Beard, like a legendary prog keyboard player. My buddy Andy Blacksugar, who's Blondie's guitar player and played with Peter Murphy back in the day. Adu Cominato, who's a brilliant drummer from Brazil, who's Jeff Tate's guy. So I've had a bunch of new friends on this one. And yeah, I'm pumped up. It's coming out, and all of a sudden all the reviews are coming in really, really positively. So I'm looking forward to pursuing the rest of the year on that.
Well, all the best to you, my friend. It was very nice catching up. We should do this more often.
Dude, thanks so much for having me on the show, even though I wasn't first or second or even third or fourth, maybe. I wasn't even fifth. What is this, 30 now? I'm like the last guy. You're moving on to another podcast.
Yeah, this is definitely we're getting up into the high 20s here.
Well, congratulations, dude. It's fun seeing that blow up for you. So
thank you, man. Another success story. Let me tell you something. Not every musician is a success story. It's a really hard business. Yeah, the big ones, Poison and Motley Crue and Def Leppard. But it's not like that for most musicians. It's kind of a grind. And Jason kind of figured it out. Smart guy, had his, fame with Saigon Kick in the early 90s. And then kind of figured that out. After that band, he wrote a record for a movie, American Pie. Huge movie, obviously. And I don't care what he says about Blink-182. His song is all through that American Pie movie. He goes to do that. He transitions into owning a record label and developing other artists and has success with Nonpoint and Skindred and a bunch of other bands that I could probably name, but I'm forgetting at this present time. But regardless, figured it out. Now he tours by himself and his friend Jeff Scott Soto, who's from Trans-Siberian Orchestra. And they have a little comedy music show, and it's great, man. It's a lot of fun. It's entertaining. And Jason, kind of calls his own shots now. He wants to go to L.A. this weekend. He'll perform a couple of shows in L.A. He wants to go to Florida this weekend. He'll do the same in Florida. He's figured it out and does very, very well for himself. New album coming out, which you could find out more on jasonbieler.com. That's BIELER.com, all over social media, Twitter, Instagram. He's everywhere. And he's a big fan of Photoshop. So if you're not familiar with Jason, keep that Photoshop thing in the back of your mind because, you'll figure it out when you see some of his posts. Seems like Jason had a couple of retail jobs, one at Richway and another where he buffed floors in the middle of the night in a lawn service. Seems like he had a bit of the kleptomania maybe as a younger man. I hope this podcast doesn't incriminate him now. I'd feel really guilty about that. But other than music, this is where he's made his money, which I always find as interesting. And I know Jason probably a little modest with his big break, but for sure, the song Love Is On The Way that he wrote, a huge song, and was on the radio, MTV. Those guys blew up in a relatively short amount of time. I would imagine that song was definitely life-changing for him and the band Saigon Kick. So there we have it, another episode of Celebrity Jobber. I thank you for listening. Please subscribe, download, rate, and review wherever you pod. And I'll see you next week. I'm Jeff Zito.